Thank you for coming, everyone. I am Sean Omar Rivera. A few of you may know me from some of my history with the SSA. So I'm going to go ahead and breeze through these first few, it's just a little bit of introductory information. So as mentioned, that's my name, Sean Omar Rivera. I have tons of voter registration experience. Obviously, we're here to talk about that. I'm currently a city council aide, a huge Star Trek fan, and I made my little joke there. Please seriously use the Oxford comma. Your sentences aren't going to make any sense without it. Let's see. So I actually started with my high school SSA. I think I was about 14 at the time. Uh, Absolutely amazing experience. First time I was exposed to people interested in socio-political issues. Absolutely changed my life. And as always, I love to troll preachers. It was just kind of a pastime of mine. I've halfway retired from that pastime, but I still love it. Let's see. So eventually I became the president of the SSA at UTSA. Once again, fell in love with the organization, everyone in it. If I wasn't such a hermit, I would be hanging out with them still constantly. Let's see. From there, or during that, I branched out into a lot of intersectional activism. I'm sure a lot of you appreciate that. Separation of church and state is extremely intertwined and really can't be parsed out from so many other issues, that affect, of course, yourselves and, everyone with that we know and love from all communities. Let's see. So also mixed into all of that, this isn't necessarily chronological, it kind of blends, but I became the manager of some pretty massive voter registration efforts and drives, things like that, programs. Had a fantastic time. That's my my child, uh, fresh out of the oven. And let's see. So as I mentioned, now I'm a city council aide, living my best life. I work with an amazing team of people and loving every second of it. All right, so just a quick background on how this is going to go. I have parsed some of this information out into three kind of levels. I guess you could say skill levels or responsibility levels. This topic is so extremely complex and large in length that I probably cannot cover it in honestly hours and hours and hours of speaking to you and boring all of you. So I'm actually going to make a supplementary video. I don't want to take up all of the SSA's time. So I'm going to record a part 2 and 3, and I'll go ahead and let you know about a YouTube channel that I'm going to open purely for the case of dropping those videos in case you need them. Let's see, I think we're getting a little bit of audio feedback, but cool. So we're mostly going to cover this section, canvassing. We also have the organizing level, and we have the director level. Let's see. So here are a few disclaimers. I'm going to try to say this, as politely as possible. Let's see. So I do things scrappy. That means I absolutely do not care if a program looks extremely polished. When I wrote this sentence, maybe it sounds a little bit rough, but I have limited, I guess you could say, regard for some traditional ideas that you're going to hear from some common campaign consultants. I spend my time registering, not figuring out which specific tiny individual in this one address to go out and register. Yeah, I kind of covered that. I figure out where the registrations are. I hit that place. I hit it extremely hard, and at the risk of being a bit cocky, I walk away with a stack of voter registration forms the size of a toddler. It's not a figure of speech because there's one of the stacks. So this stack, we actually registered 3 times this many voters, and we did that in 10 hours. So yeah, really awesome experience. We've done it multiple times, and yeah, it's something that is absolutely impossible, or is absolutely possible if you approach it with the right attitude. Let's see. So this is a little bit redundant of a slide, but you're going to have a lot of people who are going to come in. They're going to say that you need to use some expensive, overused targeting program. For those of you, for example, who are familiar with VAN, the Voter Activation Network, things like that. And I really, in many cases, especially for voter registration as a specific activity, do not think it's necessary. Or I think you can do great things without it. So this really covers that. You don't need a bloated multi-million-dollar nonprofit or these consultants or these targeting systems to register voters. You got to find the group of people you want to register. You got to make the asks. You got to make the asks good. This whole presentation is really just about that. You got to make the asks really good, and you have to make a lot of them. So, at the risk of being redundant, here are the 3 levels. So getting the work done, that's the thing we're going to talk about. Getting the work ready, that is what the organizing is about, and figuring out what the work needs to be is the director level there. And as I mentioned, we're going to cover some of this with a little bit of this, maybe even a little bit of this. Okay, so here's the situation. Your program director already finished the goals and the strategy. Your local organizer already coordinated and set up the shift. You're there. Now what do you do? Register like a pro. All right, so we're actually just going to go right into face-to-face asks. So in a normal voter registration operation, I'd say there are 2 very common forms of voter registration you can do, or types of activities, canvassing and tabling. So they do go hand in hand. Canvassing is grabbing a clipboard. I have a bunch of clipboards here that are left over from my voter registration time. So grabbing clipboards, walking up to people, getting them registered. Tabling, extremely similar, of course, but you're doing it with the table. So there are some benefits and drawbacks to both of these. When you're canvassing at a certain location, you have full independent movement. Now that means 2 things. That means in the location that your drive is taking place, you can, of course, freely move towards the pockets or the dense pockets of people. It also means that if that shift as a whole is not working, no problem. Go ahead, pick up the entire shift and move it somewhere else. I'm not going to do a Patrick voice, but yeah, move it somewhere else. Now, also, actually one drawback is you do have cumbersome equipment. Now, when I run voter registration drives, I prefer to bring supplies for the absolute best case scenario, amount of traffic. Where you're going to be registering, more people than you can count on your hands at the same time. If you bring adequate supplies for that, it's going to be kind of hard to carry around. But on the other hand, of course, you have the maximum potential for face-to-face asks to walk up to people and rapid fire ask, are you registered to vote? Are you registered to vote? Tabling, I would actually say, it looks like it may have, a few drawbacks, but really it's up for interpretation. So some of the drawbacks, though, it can limit the drive's mobility, as mentioned. It's really just the opposite of this right here. The drive itself has to stay in the same place for the most part. And the big thing is, although you can mix these 2 together, at least one person is always going to be tied to the table. And they won't be able to really move freely. But another great thing is it has centralized processing, so that that means really one person can handle any amount of volume. They can. There's really no limit to the amount of people they can register at the same time. And then, of course, also you have a very significant benefit of the actual signage. The table itself is almost like another canvasser. It's making asks for you and reaching people that you otherwise wouldn't be able to talk to. So what I personally recommend is actually doing a hybrid model. So have independent movers and also have a home base that you can all return to, and you have one person staffing. So you get the maximum potential personal asks, and then you also get the benefit of the signage, the centralized processing, all of that. I actually even made some examples of things you can try to aim for. So For example, I did a lot of work at Texas State University, about 47,000 students. None of them were registered to vote, especially the freshmen who had just changed addresses. So I was actually in this number one scenario right here. Um, I wouldn't have to bring a table. I was out there. I was making constant asks. By the way, of course, to translate this, that's me. That's the canvasser, and these are your passersby. So essentially, uh, what I would aim for is ask as many people as humanly possible. The moment somebody says yes, go ahead and get them set up. And of course, it's not a waste of time to talk to somebody, of course, but definitely don't don't dilly dally too much. There's always still time that you can be making asks while attending to that person. So I get them set up. I let them know that I'm right here next to you if you need any help, and I'll help you once you're done with the form also. And then I just keep making rapid fire asks. And I make them until I am at absolute maximum capacity. Uh, Another scenario you can have here, of course, is if you are alone at the table. So you are tied to the table, but I wouldn't stand behind the table, anything like that. I would definitely still be actively making asks as far from the table as possible without detaching yourself from your own drive. Now, these two are kind of hybrid models of sorts. Um, and in a manner of speaking, this can also be a hybrid model because you can actually have one person who's at the table, and then in that same voter registration drive, you can have somebody who is far off, who knows where, in that, whether it's a college campus or something like that, they can be out doing their own thing and setting themselves up like this. But something that I personally think is probably the optimal model is this one right here. So you have one person who has limitless, bottomless capacity to register voters because they have the table. And then you have these people right here who I guess you could say are the hooks. They hook the people in and they direct them to the table. These people, for the most part, don't want to be in this number one situation right here. Really, their only job is to make rapid fire asks, get those people, direct them to the table. This person handles that, sets them up on the table. If you're out of clipboard, no problem. Let's go ahead and set up a surface. If we're out of surfaces, no problem. You can write on my back. Um, I think this really helps the flow as much as possible. Because, for lack of a better word, these people at the table are almost like a captive audience at that point. Now let's see. This one, I'll touch on it very briefly, but this is the like holy grail, version of voter registration, where the table is at maximum capacity. You're spilling over into making your own little microcosm here, and you're shouting outside of your microcosm, and you're directing people back to the table still, or to that individual person. So those are ways that you can set up. But another big question, of course, is where physically should I place myself? So for tabling, of course, this has a lot of nuance. It depends on what things you're able to do, within your comfort level. But I would say if it's not extremely inconvenient for you, I would probably be front and center. I definitely would not be behind the table. There are a lot of extremely well-meaning individuals or organizations that will set up, sit very politely behind the table, wave and nod, and register maybe two people. But if you're right there in front of people talking to them, I promise you'll walk away with, as I mentioned, the stack the size of a toddler, depending on the drive. Now, for canvassing, I think once again, it's just getting out of your comfort zone. So if you find a bottleneck of traffic, I'd place yourself smack dab in the middle of the bottleneck. Um, that could mean if you find a hallway, you can place yourself right in the middle of the hallway. You don't even have to be to the side of it. Really, you want to put yourself in a situation where, and I say this, once again, with the nuance of not making people uncomfortable at all, but making yourself completely seen and noticeable. Almost think about it as your somewhat irritating, campus street preachers. You might see them from a mile away. You're going to start trying to give a wide berth so you can go around them. but they're going to intercept you one way or another, and you're just going to have to deal with it. So I would say you almost want to create an ideal situation where, unless the person wants to exit the whole general vicinity, just so they don't have to interact with you for 1 second, um, you want to kind of set up a situation where, of course you're being polite and nice about it, but they're going to have to at least acknowledge your presence. And then also, I wrote this down. I'll explain this. In your own pocket universe. So a lot of people who are new to voter registration, they'll like to kind of clump together. A lot of people, some interns, for example, that I've worked with in the past, until they get to their comfort level, they will be attached at the hip. What I would say is, just make sure that you're spread out just enough where you can still, completely be in each other's line of sight. You don't have to lose track of each other, but I would separate yourself just enough where the people that you are interacting with don't also overlap, at least excessively, with the people that your partners are interacting with, essentially. So, where should I go? And what I mean by that is, you are placed in a certain area. There's a person approaching. So, what do I do with myself? So, this one, I'll try not to make the disclaimer too many times because it can take up a lot of time, but there is extreme nuance with this one. You, of course, have to respect people's, agency to disengage if they feel like disengaging. But once again, you also want to make yourself seen. So what I would say is intercept, by which I mean do not completely, charge them, but it does mean you're not staying in the exact same place. I'm not sure if my video is pinned, but hey, by the way, Ryan, is my video pinned?
Yeah, you're good. Oh, yeah,
Sweet.
your video's pinned on the
Awesome.
screen.
Okay, cool. Awesome. I should pin it for myself too so I can see what I'm doing. Okay. So, yeah, essentially, you don't want to be sitting over here to the side saying, oh, hello, are you registered to vote? What you want to do is, if you're able to stand, you can be standing in front of the table. The person is coming up. So you're going to want to actively move over and say, hey, how are you? And actually kind of, enter, you know, not their personal bubble, but their universe, their area. Of course, you want to judge distance responsibly, but once again, you don't want to be a million miles away. What I would probably say, an arm's length is definitely a bit too close. Maybe a body length, 6 feet or so, or something in that, ballpark. I guess like my body length as far as height goes and all that type of stuff, you know. So, or wingspan. But yeah, so you definitely want to, once again, just be in their area, but respect their their space. Now let's see. You want to, and this one is the real one that really needs the nuance, but you want to very partially eclipse them. And when I say that, once again, it doesn't mean, and if you can see my hand, since I think my video is pinned, you definitely don't want to be in front of them. Of course, like I said, you want to respect their agency to move out of your way. But I would go and say, given that you have, a responsible distance from them, I would probably at least put yourself in some position where you're, at least mildly in their path. I'd probably say if they continue to move forward, enclose the entire distance, which once again is a responsible distance, maybe they would almost brush your shoulder. Basically just be mildly in front of them, of course. These other two ones, so match. And when I say that, I basically mean if somebody, when you approach this person, if you approach them doing these other steps right here, but let's say, of course, they're still on the move, they're still going to breeze right past you. So what you're going to want to do, once again, still respectfully, is at least mildly match, their general trajectory. So you want to say, hey, how are you? And at least go ahead and, maintain yourself, or maintain your relative distance um, by moving along with them, at least until you get the ask out, basically. And this one, once again, huge nuance is being mobile. And when I say that, depending on, using your very best judgment, if there, let's say there have been multiple situations, for example, where somebody is interested in what we're offering, but maybe they feel like they don't have the time. Hey, I'm on my way to, in the university situation, I'm on my way to class on the other side of campus. So if you think that the situation is right and you're using your best judgment, you can say, okay, well, how about this? you know It'll only take you about a minute. I don't want to, of course, take up all of your time, but I see that you're going to the other side of campus. I see there's the big stairs right there. How about I help you out on the way to that stairs, and by the time we're there, you'll be registered and you'll be good to go. And I've had, myself, of course, and many other people, interns, even very inexperienced folks who have said it. They've said it in a genuine way, and it did come off correctly. Everyone did appreciate the offer, and most of the time they say, "Yeah, okay, fine." And by the time they're there, they're registered. So all of this is to say, please be assertive, and that does not mean aggressive. So I'm honestly not going to dwell on these for too long, but in short, being assertive once again means you want them to understand what you're offering and decide whether or not they want it, as opposed to aggressive, which would be fill out the form. Fill it out now. I don't care if you need to fill it out or if it's even helpful for enfranchising you. I just want you to fill out the form so I can record down that I registered a person to vote. As long as you follow some of those previous things that I mentioned, really this kind of comes naturally, or this falls into place. As long as you have this in mind, you're genuinely there to help them. So, really, out of this entire presentation, this is the most important part by far, is making a hard ask. And this applies not just to registering to vote, but to everything. Fundraising, other examples that I'm not thinking of right now. So, a hard ask does not necessarily mean a tough ask or an intimidating ask. All it means is that it's an actual conclusive ask. By the end of the time you're speaking, the person actually knows that there was a question mark at the end of what you said. And ideally, you should tailor that ask to corral the discussion, at least the first step of that discussion, into a simple yes or no answer. So, a lot of things I see with people who are new to registering people to vote is something that is either not a hard ask or just flat out not an ask at all. So, hey, do you have time to register to vote? Which is not necessarily asking them the direct question, it's asking them about their schedule. Would you like to register to vote? It's not necessarily asking about the actual question, it's really just asking how they're feeling right now. Which that, of course, is important, but it comes up for later in the discussion. And then, even things like this, what are your thoughts on voter registration? And these ones are just flat out not an ask, and these are very, very common, which is, hey, I'm registering people to vote. And of course, a response for that can be, okay, great, bye. So what you really want to do is really just not overthink it. I can't stress enough that having a simple script is one of the best parts or the most important parts of doing this effectively. So just flat out ask them, hey, are you registered to vote? It's very simple, yes or no. If they say yes, fantastic, I'm glad you are. If they say no, okay, great. I mean, well, great, we can do something about that. So there are some other things that you could add on to that question without being too excessive about it. When I say state dependent, I mean it depends on, what state you're living in and what the policies there are. Here in Texas, for example, under most circumstances, your address has to be up to date on your voter registration if you don't want a bunch of problems and inconveniences. And in many situations, it's a very good idea to have a voter registration certificate that they send you if you don't want trouble. So those are some questions, for example, that we go ahead and tack on to that same question. Let's see, and of course, if there are other things that you'd like to sign that person up for, you can go ahead and add it there. And I just say make a basic flowchart of it. And just make sure that all of these questions follow that same kind of formula or those same criteria for what a hard ask is. It's a yes or no. It's definitely a question. and it leads you to potential possibilities or opportunities to offer them something. So, are you registered to vote? At your current address. Super simple question. That, put in that second question that was on the previous slide. Something that, and I, given that at least I'm doing this directly through the Secular Student Alliance, I'm sure that, a few of your students, if you're doing this at a campus at some point after this terrible, pandemic is over, um, something that I do is if you go outside of a dorm room and wait for people to come out and make this ask, a lot of people, once again, depending on the state and if you actually need an updated address, um, have a very, very hard time understanding exactly what a residence address is. A lot of students will give me an answer if you understand the size of Texas. And when I ask, hey, are you registered to vote at your current address? They'll say, well, yeah, sure, of course I'm registered to vote at my current address 400 miles away in Dallas. You're like, okay, well, that's a very long commute. I'm extremely impressed. You have some real school spirit. Um, but something I'll do, for example, you just want to make it extremely straightforward. And I'll even say like, hey, are you registered to vote at your current address? And then with my fingers, I'll like point to the ground and say here. And they'll look back at their dorm that they just walked out of and say, oh, here? No. And then we'll take care of them. Let's see. So you've asked your question correctly. They gave you your answer, which if you want to register them to vote, the answer would be no, I'm not registered. A lot of people will actually get a small amount tripped up. They'll think, okay, well, crickets, chirp, and then, well, would you like to get registered? And you kind of fell into the thing that you just avoided. So what I'd say, don't even bother with a question. The next thing should just be a direct offer. So they handed you your answer. You have a clipboard in your hand. Just start handing them the clipboard. And honestly, it doesn't even matter what you say. It's go time. So you can say, "Cool, awesome, let's do it." I honestly will just turn the clipboard over to them and say, "All right, bam, here you go, bud." And let's get started. A lot of the time, people will actually respond to that. They'll understand, okay, well, this seems like a very casual, straightforward process. Let me just go for it. And once again, going back to the whole, not being aggressive, being assertive thing. Yeah, once again, it's about being genuine. So if they're giving you ambiguous answers, you're not exactly sure if they're on board or not. You don't have to lie. Please don't lie. Just tell them the truth. The truth is, this is an extremely convenient, easy process. So what I'll even do is I'll pull up my phone, I'll start a timer, and I'll say, all right, how about this? And I promise you this. I'm going to start the timer. By the time it reaches a minute and a half, you could be registered and be completely on with your day and totally all the better off for it. And then, of course, there are other things you can add. Like in reality, you have nothing to lose and everything to gain by filling out this voter registration form. So here are a few examples of things that people could potentially say to that. And once again, this doesn't just apply to canvassing and tabling. This applies to just about every type of solicitation that you can that's related to voting. Some people will say my vote doesn't matter. And honestly, almost all responses that people give usually are under this general bucket, a lack of voter efficacy. So what I would say, in your own words, is just to remember, if your vote didn't matter, this sums up honestly most of these. If your vote didn't matter, why are people trying so hard to take it away from you? There wouldn't be a massive effort to put barriers between you and the polls. Let's see. So the only other thing, though, not only is that a good way to frame it, but this is one of those situations where actually throwing the facts at them sometimes works. So, a lot of times people say my vote doesn't matter. They're probably talking about something extremely high level, when in reality, the vast majority of elections are not the elections that they're immediately thinking of. I work for city council, for example. I have someone who I really, really have a lot of respect for. This person was running for council a handful of years ago. I can tell you right now, I talked to probably 50 separate people who all told me my vote doesn't matter, so I'm not going to vote. and that person, the candidate, lost by 20 votes. You know, so really, a handful of voters, and in many cases, even a single voter, very frequently can make the difference between a great candidate winning and someone who is either status quo or dog poop terrible. And these people, of course, make extreme decisions about your lives. I think we appreciate that now more than ever. I just watched our city council session because, of course, we're talking about police violence and what we need to do about it in my community. And I'm sure a lot of your councils are doing that as well. So, another thing that people will say is the Electoral College elects the president. Of course, that one has a very easy answer. It's just quick clarification. That is one seat in thousands and thousands and thousands of elected seats across the country. There are dozens of elections all the time. That is the only one that uses a system that resembles that. So, uh, of course, you're a little bit closer to direct democracy, in a manner of speaking, in other elections. And if you think the Electoral College is wrong, fantastic. I'm sure a lot of us here probably agree that it at least needs some kind of improvement, if not being completely removed. But if you want to make change, you're going to have to participate in this chicken and egg situation. You're going to need to vote for somebody who's willing to change it. You're also just going to have a lot of people who just flat out are going to tell you, I don't want to vote. I hate to resort to this, but sometimes you do have to, and at least, in your own way, you are still helping them, at least by helping them get registered. Uh, this doesn't obligate you to vote. That's the big thing. If you're here in Texas, for example, um, where there, are very big restrictions, and you absolutely do have to fill out the form with all of these other criteria to be able to vote. If you don't fill out that form at some point, you are not necessarily abstaining from casting a vote. That would come later when the election comes. You are proactively putting yourself in a situation where even if you do decide to do it, you're not going to be able to do it. And that's almost like making a decision on the behalf of somebody else. You don't know who you're going to be or what you're going to think at some point in the future. So don't make that decision for yourself. Now, in my opinion, please let me know if I'm rambling, Ryan. But in my opinion, uh, when you make these asks, please be nonpartisan. If you're a younger viewer, you probably get the gist of why I'm saying that. Nobody wants to hear it if you're here just to plug a candidate or plug a party, or vote blank no matter who, all of those things. It's much more about, policy than it is about some kind of, tribal identity thing. So please be nonpartisan. Please, of course, be genuine, as mentioned. And also, please be non-discriminatory. And when I say that, I mean that in a much more open-ended way. There are, of course, a lot of marginalized folks who, there's a lot of discrimination against, of course. But also in this specific situation, when I say be non-discriminatory, I mean don't assume what people's ideologies are. So that's the reason why, I target broad populations instead of looking for one specific person who some record says voted for this type of party, in the last three primaries. Instead, I'm going to go to, let's say, for example, a relatively progressive sphere. If you're trying to, register progressive voters, and I register everyone, no matter what they look like, no matter if I, maybe for some whatever reason have some suspicion that maybe they, don't have my best, uh, you know, uh, don't have the or best intentions towards me, because I'm not sure, maybe they don't belong to the demographic that I belong to. No, I just register everyone, and I understand that even going back to this nonpartisanship thing, even if you do register a few people who do not align with the specific goals that you have in mind, trust me, if you're targeting the correct population and you are doing an effective job at making your asks, you're going to have a net positive. Um, I would rather register, 10,000 young people, knowing at least the way that young people generally lean when it comes to, their opinions about equality and any number of other subjects, uh, then spend my entire time trying to sift through people to find that one person, who aligns exactly with, one specific thing, and, trying to avoid, accidentally catching a few, folks that don't line up with that in the net. So before we move on, I'm going to very briefly talk about block walking. Um, and this is going to be very quick. So if you want to watch the supplementary video sometime, I'm going to go a little bit more into it. Basic takeaways, honestly, the general asks and the communication points, they're pretty much almost exactly the same. When you knock on the door, you're going to say just about verbatim what was already mentioned. Once again, common campaigns, they like to target specific doors, focus on, specific houses, and they honestly gloss over so many people. You know, if you've ever block walked before, I hate the experience of hopping into your car, driving up to, 132 Evergreen Terrace, which I think is the Simpsons address, knocking on their door, doing your thing, and then hopping back in your car so you can drive 5 blocks over for the next, house on your list. I like knocking every door, and accepting that one way or another democracy is going to contribute to some positive things. So the more people that are involved, the better on average. So I like to pick densely packed housing, knock every single door, and also leave something behind. When I say densely packed housing, you'd be amazed, if you haven't block walked before, how much campaigns ignore apartment complexes. It blows my mind. Um, I honestly almost exclusively block walk apartment complexes, especially for voter registration. Number one, on average, as at least, a socioeconomic indicator, these folks are probably more likely to be in a marginalized position than someone who's a homeowner. Also, they need to get their addresses up to date. Um, and of course, also convenience and volume. You're going to get to talk to tons and tons and tons of people, instead of having to walk from one big yard over to the other. If you're in Texas like me, where everyone's yard is gigantic. Let's see. And once again, I'll unpack some specifics about block walking in the next presentation. So this is my favorite form of voter registration, is mass registrations. It's all about having a captive audience in a positive way. You're helping them. But yeah, so find the people that you want to register. Once again, the example I usually use is young people. Find them in one single location and make one methodical, very well thought out ask, and deliver it beautifully. Basic steps you have here: you're going to find the target's group, or forgive me, the group's gatekeeper. In this scenario, it would be a professor. If you're trying to register an organization to vote, maybe it's the president of that organization, or the organizer. Let's see. So you're, of course, going to convince that gatekeeper to let you in. You're going to deliver the pitch, and you're going to make every single word count. So your organizer has already messaged the host. They convinced them to let you in, and the day has come. Now what? And once again, this doesn't just apply to these big auditoriums. It can be a group of 5 people. So show up prepared, of course. You need to understand, of course, that these people, although they are a captive audience in a manner of speaking, that absolutely does not guarantee that they're going to listen to a single word you said or you say. So you need to be very lively, you need to be very engaging, and above all, really, you need to be very, very easy to follow, because you have people split attention. And that means that you have to have a logical flow. Basic procedure you're going to do is you are going to show up before anyone else in the room. You're going to fill everyone in once they're there on what's going to happen. You're going to pass out the forms, you're going to give your pitch, and you're going to collect them in a very organized manner, and you're going to close out. And here's the logical flow of the script. This is something that Honestly, you can copy and paste and make into any kind of voter registration soliciting script, and it's done wonders for me. Of course, introduce yourself, explain what you're here to do. Some of these steps might feel like it's over explaining, but in reality, it's actually very necessary. Number 3 in bold is interactively help them understand if they need to register or not. I'm going to unpack that one soon. Explain why all of those points are important one by one. Walk them through the form. And once again, if you're in Texas like me, where I can get a full misdemeanor or in some situations a felony if I screw this part up, please walk them through the voter registration form very, very carefully. Remind them about the upcoming election so you can tie it to salient issues. Give any other pitches you need. Explain how the forms are going to be collected. This also is going to have its own slide. It's very important that you do that correctly, and of course, do your collection. I did not actually type much down for that number 3 that was bolded. I think the best way for me to do that, or for me to explain that, is actually just to give you an example. So, like I said, people really, may not be particularly listening. This is the most important part of the presentation. Or forgive me, not this presentation. I think y'all are all listening. But when you're giving these presentations to large groups of people. So what I usually do is a 3-part process of elimination question. These, of course, are based off of the 3 questions that you would need to ask for a Texas voter, which, of course, is, are you registered to vote? That address question I said, and that card question if they have that voter registration card. I'm just going to go ahead and give it, which is my role play example here. All right, everyone, I'm going to ask you a 3-part process of elimination question. If you actually want to follow along, you totally can. That's going to determine your voter registration status and if you need to fill out this form. Now, if I could get a show of hands, if the question or if the statement applies to you, you can keep your hand up. If it doesn't, you can go ahead and put your hand down. First question, show of hands. Who here is registered to vote at some point in your life? Most people raise their hands. Okay, fantastic. Second question, keep your hand up. Oh, keep your hand up, bud. Keep your hand up if you are registered to vote at your current address. By that, I mean picture the pillow your head is going to hit tonight. Chances are that is your current address. Okay, a few hands went down there. Final question. When you register to vote, you get an index card-sized voter certificate in the mail. Keep your hand up if you have that card, or if you can tell me where that card is. And at that point, honestly, almost all the hands go down. So from there, you would go ahead and explain why those are important. Of course, if you're not registered to vote, you can't vote. If your address isn't up to date, in Texas at least, that means any number of things. First, it means you're not voting for the right representatives, of course. It also means that you might have to hop in your car and drive 3 hours to go vote in the county you used to live in on election day, and any number of other inconvenient things. So doing your setup and your collection. This one, once again, is mostly applicable to some of the students out there. But once again, depending on the room that you're registering these people in, it could apply to any number of things. So if you're at a university, setting up in an auditorium and setting up in a normal room with rows and columns or chair desks can actually be extremely different. Now, setting up in a normal room, I'll go ahead and start with that one, is very straightforward. You want to be as comprehensive as possible, so that's where I really emphasize showing up first before any other person shows up. And just go ahead and, very simple, place a form on every single chair. This avoids a problem that comes up a lot, where you will walk up to a person, you'll try to give them a form, they'll say, no, I'm already good, and then you will essentially, by the end, have to give them the entire presentation before you even have started your real presentation, so you can convince them just to hold on to the form for a second. Let's see. So also in a normal room, I'll actually just skip to the end, of course, of that. The collection is really just about the same. What you're going to go ahead and do is you're going to go desk by desk, quietly without interrupting the professor if you're in a university and they're giving their lecture. You're going to check their form, get the corrections by, nudging them and maybe whispering and pointing to what needs to be fixed. And you're going to tear off their receipt if you're in Texas and receipts are a thing that you do. Um, and you're going to move on. You're going to do that, rinse and repeat. I'm not sure if my kid is being too loud. But you're going to rinse and repeat that until you're done with everyone. Auditoriums, those are the ones that are actually much, much, much different. Um, Hopefully I'll make this short, but when you're in an auditorium, there's a large number of people. What you're going to want to do is actually wait until everyone gets in. A lot of people will accidentally try to replicate the first version, the normal room version of passing these things out. What's going to happen is people are going to start pouring in. You'll lose track of who you've given a form and who you haven't. The auditorium format is set up in such a way where you can't necessarily go desk by desk and give everyone one. And you're going to end up panicking, saying barricade the doors and start giving a form to everyone who comes in. And then at the end of the day, everyone's going to be seated down. There are going to be pockets of people who don't have forms and people who do. And you can't parse them out. So instead, what you're going to do is you're going to wait until all of them get there. You're actually going to start your presentation without handing anyone any forms. You're going to go through the entire presentation until every single persuasive element or section is completed. Basically the hand raising exercise and the explanation of why those points are important. And then and only then is when you're actually going to start passing them the forms once they understand why they need it. And collecting also happens kind of row by row. So what you're going to do is, this is also a part where you have to really project and very, very, very clearly give them instructions. If it's multiple panels, for example, in an auditorium, you'll go ahead and say, all right, everyone, I'm ready to collect the forms. This is how we're going to do it. If you are over here in this panel, everyone get their forms, whether you filled it out or not, and go ahead and pass it down to the end of the row and put it on the floor next to the last seat. For all of you, please pass it down this way and do this, and then you'll rinse and repeat until you're done with all of the panels. Only other thing I'll say about the collection process for that before I move on is please, something that a lot of newer people will make mistakes on with this is everything's done, you're ready to leave, all of a sudden the newer person walks up with a gigantic stack of forms that are completely unorganized and say, hey, I collected everything for you. And then you're going to go, oh my God, oh no, what just happened? And then it's going to dawn on them, we have no way to tie any specific form to any specific person in this entire room. So if there's a major, major error, which once again could potentially even have criminal penalties depending on the circumstances, we have no way of getting that correction. So what you're actually going to do is once they pass them down to the end of the rows, you're going to walk up to the first row, plop yourself down, go through that small stack of forms and pass any errors back with a quick note explaining what they need to fix until they pass it back, and then distribute your receipts down that very same row, and then pick yourself up, go to the next row, and do that until you've covered every single row. It's a bit, what's the word? It takes a while, but it's the best way to do it. It actually saves you some time. So this is pretty common sense, but basically make sure that you're following the rules. I can't explain this in full detail to all of you because I don't know your specific state laws, but please know them. They're usually pretty straightforward. They're actually usually pretty easy to find too. Once again, solicit the forms earnestly and legally. Please review the forms in extreme detail for errors. Also get those corrections comprehensively and legally. In Texas, for example, you cannot get the corrections after the person has walked away and already signed the form and has their receipt, unless you personally track them down in person and get them to make the corrections themselves. Guard the forms safely and neatly, because if you lose one of those forms, you need to remember that this is somebody's civic life in your hands. If you lose that form, you don't know their life, and you might accidentally disenfranchise them if things take a turn for the worst. and make sure that the forms get exactly where they need to go, exactly when they need to get there. Once again, depending on your state, there may be penalties for that. And the worst penalty of all, of course, is not about you getting punished, but about that person ultimately not getting registered. And now I'm going to move on to getting out the vote. So just going to do a quick list of options here. So you want to go up to people, you want to solicit them to get to the polls. There are quite a few ways to do that. Of course, there's knocking on doors, reminding them about the election, possibly giving them literature, maybe a voter guide, nonpartisan voter guide, preferably. Of course, there's also canvassing. You're going to have to carefully pick exactly where you're going to do that. Chances are you'd probably want to do that in the close vicinity or in close vicinity to a polling location to divert traffic over there. Of course, tabling really follows the same principle, probably closer to one of those locations. And as mentioned, voter guides are an extremely amazing tool. If you don't have any specific, let's say, if there are no secular oriented voter guides out there, uh, League of Women Voters honestly has a fine nonpartisan voter guide, extremely comprehensive. You might be able to find a SparkNotes version somewhere instead of doing the full packet, but that's something that you can usually get without having to pay, and you can pass those out. A lot of people are afraid that they are not informed enough to cast their vote, and that really takes care of that checkbox for them. And then of course phone banking, and once again, the next video is going to talk way more about phone banking. Let's see. Also, of course, you have texting. There are a lot of great interactive text messaging systems that aren't necessarily just those annoying push notifications that you get. These systems don't necessarily require volunteers to use their personal phone numbers, which is extremely important, especially for those who, for very unfortunate reasons, might get worse responses from hostile individuals who we probably shouldn't be messaging anyway. But so this shields them from any kind of negative treatment. And then emails. Of course, that's a very, very light touch for a contact, but the great thing is that you can have extreme volume, and you can send them out with a single click. A few other ideas that we have here. So something that's been very fun is parties at the polls, depending on your state laws. That can take really any form. You can set up a table, music, snacks, whatever the minimum distance from the polls is, and once again use that to divert traffic. Which is with as much fluff and awesome fun diversions as possible. Also, parades to the polls. That's something that's awesome. That requires a little bit more legwork. Organizing with gatekeepers to large groups of people. Easy example would be professors of large classes. Getting everyone to designate a specific time to meet up, march to the polls with all of those same bells and whistles, music, and all of that, and hopefully gain some people on the way there, random passersby whose interests are piqued. Of course, dorm storms, and forgive me, dorm storms essentially, really, it's just block walking slash a literature drop in tight quarters. So it could be a dorm room, it could be a small apartment complex, things like that, and you can knock those out very, very quickly and reach a lot of people who really need to be reached. Also, some other ideas, getting creative, something that me and a team dreamed up, I think, in 2018, a very simple idea is whiteboard storms. Go to a building that has a lot of people who congregate on a regular basis, find every chalkboard, whiteboard, a messaging board, and cover it in voting reminders. Whoops, my apologies. And then the final one is presentations. So essentially, same thing as that mass voter registration, practice, but use that presentation to explain to them the importance of voting and all the specifics they need to know about their polling location and how to get there and what to bring. So briefly touching on phone banking here. This doesn't go into all the specifics. If the systems are already set by the organizer or director, the shift has already begun, you're there. These are just some very top line pieces of advice that I have for someone who's new to phone banking and not comfortable with it. The obvious one here is, of course, look at the script. When in doubt, you can always refer to the script. Usually, of course, the script is already made before a phone banking shift starts by the organizer who's already experienced in making that. And I would say, to avoid looking like a robot, you can use the script as closely as possible in the beginning, but what I would do is actually rewrite the basics of the script almost exactly, but in your own natural words, and use that until it's comfortable. And once you have that internalized, that's when I would convert the script into basic bullets or a flow chart, which gives you a lot more room, even though you're reading your own words. Just having the bullets will make it come out even more natural because you'll be creating your own words on the spot. And yeah, that's really the only things I have to say on making phone banking a little bit easy. That's something that I still do right now, even though I'm relatively comfortable with phone banking. And of course, yeah, just keep it up. So if you ever get down, me working as city council, for example, it's basically a government call center. So I definitely get some hostile calls. It's a lot like Parks and Rec. So just remember, for any problematic person that you get, there are tons and tons of fantastic ones and great conversations that are on the way down that list. I would say keep a steady pace. And of course, once this pandemic is over, I would say confer with others, make it a party if possible. It also helps you keep your pace. It also helps you, bounce perspectives off of others, see exactly what modifications to the scripts need to forgive me, what modifications need to be made. And also it, definitely helps with advice, things like that. So that actually wraps up some of the beginning stuff. We covered canvassing and tabling, both the options for setting it up and the actual execution. We talked about making an effective ask, and I stressed that that is really the most important part of this whole presentation. We talked about some basics on block walking and mass registration, and these ones we just scratched the surface of, and I elaborate on those way more in some of the videos that I'm planning on, making in the future. And these are some of those topics. So setting goals and tracking, making a good schedule, a little bit more of a dive into state compliance because, of course, if you have extreme restrictions, that's terrible. But it also has there are a lot of opportunities that come along with those restrictions for making good change. And if you don't have those restrictions, then fantastic. You just have to make sure that you're tailoring your field program to take full advantage of the freedoms that you have. Of course, we're going to do way more of a dive into the actual legwork for preparing Get Out the Vote work. 90% of Get Out the Vote is actually just the preparation. We're going to talk about organizing a phone banking drive, really the same thing as this. And honestly, one of the most exciting ones of them all is National Voter Registration Day and other massive drives. They are huge undertakings, and it's very, very fun. And then we'll also touch on volunteer recruitment and management. So, as I think I mentioned in the way beginning, because I know that this is a very long subject, I've decided to split this into multiple videos, and to respect everyone's time as much as I can. I've opened up a makeshift YouTube channel where I'll go ahead and dump those videos. So if you would like to subscribe to that when I'm able to produce that video, once my city council casework slows down a bit, you can get a notification that it's up, and I promise this is not some springboard to start some YouTube channel. I'll just post those two videos and be done with it from there. But thank you so much for your time. I know this took a while, and if there is room for questions, I'm completely happy to do them, or we could do that offline as well.
Thank you so much, Sean. That was